Chapter 5. I make an underwater phone call. I'd never seen Camp Half-Blood in winter before, and the snow surprised me. See, the camp has the ultimate magic climate control. Nothing gets inside the borders unless the director, Mr. D, wants it to. I thought it would be warm and sunny, but instead the snow had been allowed to fall lightly. Frost covered the chariot track and the strawberry fields. The cabins were decorated with tiny flickering lights, like Christmas lights, except they seemed to be balls of real fire. More lights glowed in the woods, and weirdest of all, a fire flickered in the attic window of the big house where the oracle dwelt, imprisoned in an old mummified body. I wondered if the spirit of Delphi was roasting marshmallows up there or something. "Whoa," Nico said as he climbed off the bus. "Is that a climbing wall?" "Yeah," I said. "Why is there lava pouring down it?" "Little extra challenge. Come on, I'll introduce you to Chiron. Zoe, have you met—" "I know Chiron," Zoe said stiffly. "Tell him we will be in cabin 8. Hunters, follow me." "I'll show you the way," Grover offered. "We know the way." "Oh, really? It's no trouble. It's easy to get lost here. If you don't—" He tripped over a canoe and came up still talking. "Like my old daddy goat used to say. Come on." Zoe rolled her eyes, but I guess she figured there was no getting rid of Grover. The hunters shouldered their packs and their bows and headed off towards the cabins. As Bianca D'Angelo was leaving, she leaned over and whispered something in her brother's ear. She looked at him for an answer, but Nico just scowled and turned away. "Take care, sweethearts," Apollo called after the hunters. He winked at me. "Watch out for those prophecies, Percy. I'll see you soon." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he hopped back in the bus. "Later, Thalia," he called, "and, be good." He gave her a wicked smile, as if he knew something she didn't, and then he closed the doors and revved the engine. I turned aside as the sun chariot took off in a blast of heat. When I looked back, the lake was steaming. A red Maserati soared over the woods, glowing brighter and climbing higher until it disappeared in a ray of sunlight. Nico was still looking grumpy. I wondered what his sister had told him. "Who's Chiron?" he asked. "I don't have his figurine." "Our activities director," I said. "He's, well, you'll see." "If those hunter girls don't like him," Nico grumbled, "that's good enough for me. Let's go." The second thing that surprised me about camp was how empty it was. I mean, I knew most half-bloods only trained during the summer. Just the year-rounders would be here, the ones who didn't have homes to go to, or would get attacked by monsters too much if they left. But there didn't seem even to be many of them, either. I spotted Charles Beckendorf from the Hephaestus cabin, stoking the forge outside the camp armory. The Stoll brothers, Travis and Connor from the Hermes cabin, were picking the lock on the camp's door. A few kids from the Ares cabin were having a snowball fight with the wood nymphs at the edge of the forest. That was about it. Even my old rival from the Ares cabin, Clarice, didn't seem to be around. The big house was decorated with strings of red and yellow fireballs that warmed the porch but didn't seem to set anything alight. Inside, flames crackled in the hearth. The air smelled like hot chocolate. Mr. D, the camp director, and Chiron were playing a quiet game of cards in the parlour. Chiron's brown beard was shaggier for the winter. His curly hair had grown a little longer. He wasn't posing as a teacher this year, so I guess he could afford to be casual. He wore a fuzzy sweater with a hoofprint design on it, and he had a blanket on his lap that almost hid his wheelchair completely. He smiled when he saw us. "Percy! Thalia! This must be—" "Nico D'Angelo," I said. "He and his sister are half-bloods." Chiron breathed a sigh of relief. "You succeeded then?" "Well—" His smile melted. "What's wrong? And where is Annabeth?" "Oh dear," Mr. D said in a bored voice. "Not another one lost." I've been trying not to pay attention to Mr. D, but he was kind of hard to ignore in his neon orange leopard skin warm-up suit and his purple running shoes. Like Mr. D had ever run a day in his immortal life. A golden laurel wreath was tilted sideways on his curly black hair, which must have meant he'd won the last hand of cards. "What do you mean?" Thalia asked. "Who else is lost?" Just then, Grover trotted into the room, grinning like crazy. He had a black eye and red lines on his face that looked like a slap mark. "The hunters are all moved in." Chiron frowned. "The hunters, eh? I see we have much to talk about." He glanced at Nico. "Grover, perhaps you should take your young friend to the den and show him our orientation film." "But, all right, yes, sir." "Orientation film?" Nico asked. "Is it G or PG? Because Bianca is kind of strict." "It's PG-13, Grover said. "Cool." Nico happily followed him out of the room. "Now," Chiron said to Thalia and me, "perhaps you two should sit down and tell us the whole story." When we were done, Chiron turned to Mr. D. "We should launch a search for Annabeth immediately." "I'll go," Thalia and I said at the same time. Mr. D sniffed. Certainly not. Thalia and I both started complaining, but Mr. D held up his hand. He had that purplish angry fire in his eyes that usually meant something bad and godly was going to happen if we didn't shut up. From what you have told me, Mr. D said, we have broken even on the escapade. We have, regrettably lost Annabeth, I snapped. She'd gone to camp since she was 7, and still Mr. D pretended not to know her name. Yes, he said, and you procured a small annoying boy to replace her. So I see no point risking further half-bloods on a ridiculous rescue. The possibility is very great that this Annie girl is dead. I wanted to strangle Mr. D. It wasn't fair Zeus had sent him here to dry out as camp director for 100 years. It was meant to be a punishment for Mr. D's bad behaviour on Olympus, but it ended up being a punishment for all of us. Annabeth may be alive, Chiron said, but I could tell he was having trouble sounding upbeat. He'd practically raised Annabeth all those years. She was a year-round camper, before she'd given living with her dad and stepmum a second try. She's very bright. If our enemies have her, she will try to play for time. She may even pretend to cooperate. That's right, Thalia said. Luke would want her alive. In which case, said Mr. D, I'm afraid she will have to be smart enough to escape on her own. I got up from the table. Percy. Chiron's tone was full of warning. In the back of my mind, I knew Mr. D was not somebody to mess with. Even if you were an impulsive ADHD kid like me, he wouldn't give you any slack. But I was so angry I didn't care. You're glad to lose another camper, I said. You'd like it if we all disappeared? Mr. D stifled a yawn. Oh, you have a point. Yeah, I growled. Just because you were sent here as a punishment doesn't mean you have to be a lazy jerk. This is your civilization too. Maybe you could try helping out a little. For a second, there was no sound except the crackle of the fire. The light reflected in Mr. D's eyes, giving him a sinister look. He opened his mouth to say something, probably a curse that would blast me to smithereens, when Nico burst into the room, followed by Grover. So cool, Nico yelled, holding his hands out to Chiron. You're a centaur! Chiron managed a nervous smile. Yes, Mr. D'Angelo, if you please, though I prefer to stay in human form in this wheelchair for first encounters. And whoa, he looked at Mr. D. You're the wine dude, no way! Mr. D turned his eyes away from me and gave Nico a look of loathing. The wine dude? Dionysus, right? Oh wow, I've got your figurine. My figurine? In my game, Mythomagic, and a holofoiled card too. And even though you've only got 500 attack points, and everybody thinks you're the lamest god card, I totally think your powers are sweet. Ah, Mr. D seemed truly perplexed, which probably saved my life. Well, that's, gratifying. Percy, Chiron said quickly, you and Thalia go down to the cabins. Inform the campers we'll be playing Capture the Flag tomorrow evening. Capture the flag, I asked. But we don't have enough. It is a tradition, Chiron said. A friendly match. Whenever the hunters visit. Yeah, Thalia muttered. I bet it's real friendly. Chiron jerked his head towards Mr. D, who was still frowning as Nico talked about how many defence points all the gods had in his game. Run along now, Chiron told us. Oh, right, Thalia said. Come on, Percy. She hauled me out of the big house before Dionysus could remember that he wanted to kill me. You've already got Ares on your bad side, Thalia reminded me as we trudged towards the cabins. You need another immortal enemy? She was right. My first summer as a camper I'd got in a fight with Ares, and now he and all his children wanted to kill me. I didn't need to make Dionysus mad too. Sorry, I said. I couldn't help it. It's just so unfair. She stopped by the armoury and looked out across the valley, towards the top of Half-Blood Hill. Her pine tree was still there, the golden fleece glittering in its lowest branch. The tree's magic still protected the borders of camp, but it no longer used Thalia's spirit for power. Percy, everything is unfair, Thalia muttered. Sometimes I wish... She didn't finish, but her tone was so sad I felt sorry for her. With her ragged black hair and her black punk clothes, an old wool overcoat wrapped around her, she looked like some kind of huge raven, completely out of place in the white landscape. We'll get Annabeth back, I promised. I just don't know how yet. First, I've found out that Luke is lost, she said. Now Annabeth. Don't think like that. You're right, she straightened up. We'll find a way. Over at the basketball court, a few of the hunters were shooting hoops. One of them was arguing with a guy from the Ares cabin. The Ares kid had his hand on his sword, and the hunter girl looked like she was going to exchange her basketball for a bow and arrow any second. I'll break that up, Thalia said. You circulate around the cabins. Tell everybody about Capture the Flag tomorrow. All right, you should be team captain. No, she said. You've been at camp longer. You do it. We can, co-captain or something. She looked about as comfortable with that as I felt, but she nodded. As she headed for the court, I said, Hey, Thalia. Yeah? I'm sorry about what happened at Westover. I should have waited for you guys. It's okay, Percy. I probably would have done the same thing. She shifted from foot to foot, like she was trying to decide whether or not to say more. You know, you asked about my mum, and I kind of snapped at you. It's just, I went back to find her after 7 years, and I found out she died in Los Angeles. She was a heavy drinker, and apparently she was out driving late one night about 2 years ago, and Thalia blinked hard. I'm sorry. Yeah, well, it's not like we were ever close. I ran away when I was 10. Best 2 years of my life were when I was running around with Luke and Annabeth. But still, that's why you had trouble with the sun van. She gave me a wary look. What do you mean? The way you stiffened up. You must have been thinking about your mum not wanting to get behind the wheel. I was sorry I'd said anything. Thalia's expression was dangerously close to Zeus's, the one time I'd seen him get angry. Like any minute, her eyes would shoot 1,000,000 volts. Yeah, she muttered. Yeah, that must have been it. She trudged off towards the court, where the Ares camper and the hunter were trying to kill each other with a sword and a basketball. The cabins were the weirdest collection of buildings you've ever seen. Zeus and Hera's, big white column buildings, cabins 1 and 2 stood in the middle, with 5 gods' cabins on the left and 5 goddesses' cabins on the right. So they all made a U around the central green and the barbecue hearth. I made the rounds, telling everybody about Capture the Flag. I woke up some Ares kid from his midday nap and he yelled at me to go away. When I asked him where Clarice was, he said, went on a quest for Chiron. Top secret. Is she okay? Haven't heard from her in a month. She's missing in action, like your butt's going to be if you don't get out of here. I decided to let him go back to sleep. Finally, I got to cabin 3, the cabin of Poseidon. It was a low grey building hewn from sea stone, with shells and coral fossils imprinted in the rock. Inside, it was just as empty as always, except for my bunk. A minotaur horn hung on the wall next to my pillow. I took Annabeth's baseball cap out of my backpack and set it on my nightstand. I'd give it to her when I found her, and I would find her. I took off my wristwatch and activated the shield. It creaked noisily as it spiraled out. Dr. Thorne's spikes had dented the brass in a dozen places. One gash kept the shield from opening all the way, so it looked like a pizza with 2 slices missing. The beautiful metal pictures that my brother had crafted were all banged up. In the picture of me and Annabeth fighting the Hydra, it looked like a meteor had made a crater in my head. I hung the shield on its hook next to the Minotaur horn, but it was painful to look at now. Maybe Beckendorf from the Hephaestus cabin could fix it for me. He was the best armoursmith in the camp. I'd ask him at dinner. I was staring at the shield when I noticed a strange sound, water gurgling, and I realised there was something new in the room. At the back of the cabin was a big basin of grey sea rock with a spout like the head of a fish carved in stone. Out of its mouth burst a stream of water, a saltwater spring that trickled into the pool. The water must have been hot because it sent mist into the cold winter air like a sauna. It made the room feel warm and summery, fresh with the smell of the sea. I stepped up to the pool. There was no note attached or anything, but I knew it could only be a gift from Poseidon. I looked into the water and said, "Thanks, Dad." The surface rippled. At the bottom of the pool, coins shimmered, a dozen or so golden drachma. I realised what the fountain was for. It was a reminder to keep in touch with my family. I opened the nearest window, and the wintry sunlight made a rainbow in the mist. Then I fished a coin out of the hot water. "Iris, O goddess of the rainbow," I said, "accept my offering." I tossed a coin into the mist, and it disappeared, and then I realised I didn't know who to contact first. My mum? That would have been the good son thing to do, but she wouldn't be worried about me yet. She was used to me disappearing for days or weeks at a time. My father? It had been way too long, almost 2 years since I'd actually talked to him. But could you even send an Iris message to a god? I'd never tried. Would it make them mad, like a sales call or something? I hesitated, and then I made up my mind. "Show me Tyson," I requested, "at the forges of the Cyclops." The mist shimmered, and the image of my half-brother appeared. He was surrounded by fire, which would have been a problem if he wasn't a Cyclops. He was bent over an anvil, hammering a red-hot sword blade. Sparks flew and flames swirled around his body. There was a marble-framed window behind him, and it looked out onto dark blue water, the bottom of the ocean. "Tyson!" I yelled. He didn't hear me at first because of the hammering and the roar of the flames. "Tyson!" He turned, and his one enormous eye widened. His face broke into a crooked yellow grin. "Percy!" He dropped the sword blade and ran at me, trying to give me a hug. The vision blurred and I instinctively lurched back. Tyson, it's an iris message. I'm not really here. Oh. He came back into view, looking embarrassed. Oh, I knew that, yes. How are you? I asked. How's the job? His eye lit up. Love the job, look. He picked up the hot sword blade with his bare hands. I made this. That's really cool. I wrote my name on it right there. Awesome. Listen, do you talk to Dad much? Tyson's smile faded. Not much. Daddy is busy. He is worried about the war. What do you mean? Tyson sighed. He stuck the sword blade out the window, where it made a cloud of boiling bubbles. When Tyson brought it back in, the metal was cool. Old sea spirits making trouble. Aegeus, Oceanus, those guys. I sort of knew what he was talking about. He meant the immortals who ruled the oceans back in the days of the Titans, before the Olympians took over. The fact that they were back now, with the Titan Lord Kronos and his allies gaining strength, was not good. Is there anything I can do? I asked. Tyson shook his head sadly. We're arming the mermaids. They need 1,000 more swords by tomorrow. He looked at his sword blade and sighed. Old spirits are protecting the bad boat. The Princess Andromeda, he said. Luke's boat. Yes, they made it hard to find. Protect it from Daddy Storms. Otherwise he would smash it. Smashing it would be good. Tyson perked up as if he just had another thought. Annabeth, is she there? Oh, well, my heart felt like a bowling ball. Tyson thought Annabeth was just about the coolest thing since peanut butter, and he seriously loved peanut butter. I didn't have the heart to tell him she was missing. He'd start crying so bad he'd probably put out his fires. Well, no, she's not here right now. Tell her hello, he beamed. Hello to Annabeth. Okay, I fought back a lump in my throat. I'll do that. And Percy, don't worry about the bad boat. It is going away. What do you mean? Panama Canal, very far away. I frowned. Why would Luke take his demon-infested cruise ship all the way down there? The last time we'd seen him, he'd been cruising along the east coast, recruiting half-bloods and training his monstrous army. All right, I said, not feeling reassured. That's good, I guess. In the forges, a deep voice bellowed something I couldn't make out. Tyson flinched. Got to get back to work. Boss will get mad. Good luck, brother. Okay, tell Dad. But before I could finish, the vision shimmered and faded. I was alone again in my cabin, feeling even lonelier than before. I was pretty miserable at dinner that night. I mean, the food was excellent as usual. You can't go wrong with barbecue, pizza and never-empty soda goblets. The torches and braziers kept the outdoor pavilion warm, but we all had to sit with our cabin mates, which meant I was alone at the Poseidon table. Thalia sat alone at the Zeus table, but we couldn't sit together. Camp rules. At least the Hephaestus, Ares and Hermes cabins had a few people each. Nico sat with the Stoll brothers, since new campers always got stuck in the Hermes cabin if their Olympian parent was unknown. The Stoll brothers seemed to be trying to convince Nico that poker was a much better game than Mythomagic. I hope Nico didn't have any money to lose. The only table that really seemed to be having a good time was the Artemis table. The hunters drank and ate and laughed like one big happy family. Zoe sat at the head like she was the mama. She didn't laugh as much as the others, but she did smile from time to time. Her silver lieutenant's band glittered in the dark braids of her hair. I thought she looked a lot nicer when she smiled. Bianca D'Angelo seemed to be having a great time. She was trying to learn how to arm wrestle from the big girl who'd picked a fight with the Ares kid on the basketball court. The bigger girl was beating her every time, but Bianca didn't seem to mind. When we finished eating, Chiron made the customary toast to the gods and formally welcomed the hunters of Artemis. The clapping was pretty half-hearted. Then he announced the Goodwill Capture the Flag game for tomorrow night, which got a much better reception. Afterwards, we all trailed back to our cabins for an early winter lights out. I was exhausted, which meant I fell asleep easily. That was the good part. The bad part was I had a nightmare, and even by my standards, it was a whopper. Annabeth was on a dark hillside, shrouded in fog. It almost seemed like the underworld because I immediately felt claustrophobic and I couldn't see the sky above, just a close, heavy darkness, as if I were in a cave. Annabeth struggled up the hill. Old broken Greek columns of black marble were scattered around as though something had blasted a huge building to ruins. Fawn, Annabeth cried, where are you? Why did you bring me here? She scrambled over a section of broken wall and came to the crest of the hill. She gasped. There was Luke, and he was in pain. He was crumpled on the rocky ground trying to rise. The blackness seemed to be thicker around him. Fog swirling hungrily. His clothes were in tatters, and his face was scratched and drenched with sweat. Annabeth, he called. Help me, please. She ran forward. I tried to cry out, he's a traitor, don't trust him. But my voice didn't work in the dream. Annabeth had tears in her eyes. She reached down like she wanted to touch Luke's face, but at the last second she hesitated. What happened? She asked. They left me here, Luke groaned. Please, it's killing me. I couldn't see what was wrong with him. He seemed to be struggling against some invisible curse, as though the fog was squeezing him to death. Why should I trust you? Annabeth asked. Her voice was filled with hurt. You shouldn't, Luke said. I've been terrible to you, but if you don't help me, I'll die. Let him die, I wanted to scream. Luke had tried to kill us in cold blood too many times. He didn't deserve anything from Annabeth. Then the darkness above Luke began to crumble, like a cavern roof in an earthquake. Huge chunks of black rock began falling. Annabeth rushed in just as a crack appeared, and the whole ceiling dropped. She held it somehow, tons of rock. She kept it from collapsing on her and Luke just with her own strength. It was impossible. She shouldn't have been able to do that. Luke rolled free, gasping. Thanks, he managed. Help me hold it, Annabeth groaned. Luke caught his breath. His face was covered in grime and sweat. He rose unsteadily. I knew I could count on you. He began to walk away as the trembling blackness threatened to crush Annabeth. Help me, she pleaded. Oh, don't worry, Luke said. Your help is on the way. It's all part of the plan. In the meantime, try not to die. The ceiling of darkness began to crumble more, pushing Annabeth against the ground. I sat bolt upright in bed, clawing at the sheets. There was no sound in my cabin, except the gurgle of the saltwater spring. The clock on my nightstand read just after midnight. Only a dream. But I was sure of two things. Annabeth was in terrible danger, and Luke was responsible. Chapter 6. An old dead friend comes to visit. The next morning after breakfast, I told Grover about my dream. We sat in the meadow watching the satyrs chase the wood nymphs through the snow. The nymphs had promised to kiss the satyrs if they got caught, but they hardly ever did. Usually the nymph would let the satyr get up a full head of steam, and then she'd turn into a snow-covered tree, and the poor satyr would slam into it headfirst and get a pile of snow dumped on him. When I told Grover my nightmare, he started twirling his finger in his shaggy leg fur. A cave ceiling collapsed on her, he asked. Yeah, what the heck does that mean? Grover shook his head. I don't know, but after what Zoe dreamed... Whoa, what do you mean? Zoe had a dream like that? I don't know exactly. About 3 a.m, she came to the big house and demanded to talk to Chiron. She looked really panicked. Wait, how do you know this? Grover blushed. I was sort of camped outside the Artemis cabin. What for? Just to be, near them. You're a stalker with hooves. I am not. Anyway, I followed her to the big house and hid in a bush and watched the whole thing. She got really upset when Argus wouldn't let her in. It was kind of a dangerous scene. I tried to imagine that. Argus was the head of security for camp, a big blonde dude with eyes all over his body. He rarely showed himself unless something serious was going on. I wouldn't want to place bets on a fight between him and Zoe Nightshade. What did she say? I asked. Grover grimaced. Well, she starts talking really old-fashioned when she gets upset, so it was kind of hard to understand. But something about Artemis being in trouble and needing the hunters. And then she called Argus a boil-brained lout. I think that's a bad thing. And then he called her... Whoa, wait. How could Artemis be in trouble? Finally Chiron came out in his pyjamas and his horsetail in curlers, and he wears curlers in his tail. Grover covered his mouth. Sorry, I said. Go on. Well, Zoe said she needed permission to leave camp immediately. Chiron refused. He reminded Zoe that the hunters were supposed to stay here until they received orders from Artemis. And she said... Grover gulped. She said, how are we to get orders from Artemis if Artemis is lost? What do you mean lost? Like she needs directions? No, I think she meant gone, taken, kidnapped. Kidnapped? I tried to get my head and my mind around the idea. How would you kidnap an immortal goddess? Is that even possible? Well, yeah, it happened to Persephone. But she was like the goddess of flowers. Grover looked offended. Springtime? Whatever. Artemis is a lot more powerful than that. Who could kidnap her and why? Grover shook his head miserably. I don't know. Kronos? He can't be that powerful already. Can he? The last time we'd seen Kronos, he'd been in tiny pieces. Well, we hadn't actually seen him. Thousands of years ago, after the big Titan god war, the gods had sliced him to bits with his own scythe and scattered his remains in Tartarus, which is like the gods' bottomless recycling bin for their enemies. 2 summers ago, Kronos had tricked us to the very edge of the pit and almost pulled us in. Then last summer, on board Luke's demon cruise ship, we'd seen a golden coffin, where Luke claimed he was summoning the Titan Lord out of the abyss, bit by bit, every time someone new joined their cause. Kronos could influence people with dreams and trick them. But I didn't see how he could physically overcome Artemis, if he was still like a pile of evil bark mulch. I don't know, Grover said. I think somebody would know if Kronos had reformed. The gods would be more nervous. But still, it's weird. Yeah, you having a nightmare the same night as Zoe. It's almost like... They're connected, I said. Over in the frozen meadow, a satyr skidded on his hooves as he chased after a red-headed tree nymph. She giggled and held out her arms as he ran towards her. Pop! She turned into a Scotch pine and he kissed the trunk at top speed. Ah, love, Grover said dreamily. I thought about Zoe's nightmare, which she'd had only a few hours after mine. I've got to talk to Zoe, I said. Before you do. Grover took something out of his coat pocket. It was a three-fold display like a travel brochure. You remember what you said about how it was weird the hunters just happened to show up at Westover Hall? I think they might have been scouting us. Scouting us? What do you mean? He gave me the brochure. It was about the hunters of Artemis. The front read, "A wise choice for your future." Inside were pictures of young maidens doing hunter stuff, chasing monsters, shooting bows. There were captions like, health benefits, immortality, and what it means for you, and a boy free tomorrow. I found that in Annabeth's backpack, Grover said. I stared at him. I don't understand. Well, it seems to me, maybe Annabeth was thinking about joining. I'd like to say I took the news well. The truth was, I wanted to strangle the hunters of Artemis, one eternal maiden at a time. The rest of the day, I tried to keep busy, but I was worried sick about Annabeth. I went to javelin throwing class, but the Ares camper in charge yelled at me after I got distracted and threw the javelin at the target before he got out of the way. I apologised for the hole in his trousers, but he still sent me packing. I visited the Pegasus stables, but Selena Beauregard from the Aphrodite cabin was having an argument with one of the hunters, and I decided I'd better not get involved. After that, I sat in the empty chariot stands and sulked. Down at the archery fields, Chiron was conducting target practice. I knew he'd be the best person to talk to. Maybe he could give me some advice. But something held me back. I had a feeling Chiron would try to protect me, like he always did. He might not tell me everything he knew. I looked in the other direction. At the top of Half-Blood Hill, Mr. D and Argus were feeding the baby dragon that guarded the Golden Fleece. Then it occurred to me, no one would be in the big house. There was someone else. Something else. I could ask for guidance. My blood was humming in my ears as I ran into the house and took the stairs. I'd only done this once before, and I still had nightmares about it. I opened the trapdoor and stepped into the attic. The room was dark and dusty and cluttered with junk, just like I remembered. There were shields with monster bites out of them, and swords bent in the shapes of demon heads, and a bunch of taxidermy, like a stuffed harpy, and a bright orange python. Over by the window, sitting on a three-legged stool, was the shriveled-up mummy of an old lady in a tie-dyed hippie dress. The Oracle. I made myself walk towards her. I waited for green mist to billow from the mummy's mouth, like it had before, but nothing happened. "Hi," I said. What's up?" I winced at how stupid that sounded. Not much could be up when you're dead and stuck in the attic, but I knew the spirit of the Oracle was in there somewhere. I could feel a cold presence in the room, like a coiled sleeping snake. "I have a question," I said a little louder. "I need to know about Annabeth. How can I save her?" No answer. The sun slanted through the dirty attic window, making the dust motes dance in the air. I waited longer. Then I got angry. I was being stonewalled by a corpse. "All right," I said. "Fine. I'll figure it out myself." I turned and bumped into a big stable full of souvenirs. It seemed more cluttered than the last time I was here. Heroes stored all kinds of stuff in the attic. Quest trophies they no longer wanted to keep in their cabins, or stuff that held painful memories. I knew Luke had stored a dragon claw somewhere up here, the one that had scarred his face. There was a broken sword hilt labelled, "This broken Leroy got killed. 1999. Then I noticed a pink silk scarf with a label attached to it. I picked up the tag and tried to read it. Scarf of the goddess Aphrodite. Recovered at Waterland, Denver, Co. By Annabeth Chase and Percy Jackson. I stared at the scarf. I'd totally forgotten about it. 2 years ago, Annabeth had ripped this scarf out of my hands and said something like, "Oh no, no love magic for you." I just assumed she'd thrown it away, and yet here it was. She'd kept it all this time, and why had she stashed it in the attic? I turned to the mummy. She hadn't moved, but the shadows across her face made it look like she was smiling gruesomely. I dropped the scarf and tried not to run towards the exit. The night after dinner, I was seriously ready to beat the hunters at Capture the Flag. It was going to be a small game. Only 13 hunters, including Bianca D'Angelo, and about the same number of campers. Zoe Nightshade looked pretty upset. She kept glancing resentfully at Chiron, like she couldn't believe he was making her do this. The other hunters didn't look too happy either. Unlike last night, they weren't laughing or joking around. They just huddled together in the dining pavilion, whispering nervously to each other as they strapped on their armour. Some of them even looked like they'd been crying. I guess Zoe had told them about her nightmare. On our team, we had Beckendorf and 2 other Hephaestus guys, a few from the Ares cabin, though it still seemed strange that Clarice wasn't around, the Stoll brothers and Nico from Hermes' cabin, and a few Aphrodite kids. It was weird that the Aphrodite cabin wanted to play. Usually they sat on the sidelines, chatted and checked their reflections in the river and stuff, but when they heard we were fighting the hunters, they were raring to go. I'll show them. Love is worthless, Selina Beauregard grumbled as she strapped on her armour. I'll pulverise them. That left Thalia and me. I'll take the offence, Thalia volunteered. You take defence. Oh, I hesitated, because I'd been about to say the exact same thing, only reversed. Don't you think with your shield and all, you'd be better defence? Thalia already had Aegeus on her arm, and even her own teammates were giving her a wide berth, trying not to cower before the bronze head of Medusa. Well, I was thinking it would make better offence, Thalia said. Besides, you've had more practice at defence. I wasn't sure if she was teasing me. I'd had some pretty bad experiences with defence on Capture the Flag. My first year, Annabeth had put me out as a kind of bait, and I'd almost been gored to death with spears and killed by a hellhound. Yeah, no problem, I lied. Cool. Thalia turned to help some of the Aphrodite kids, who were having trouble suiting up their armour without breaking their nails. Nico D'Angelo ran up to me with a big grin on his face. Percy, this is awesome! His blue feathered bronze helmet was falling in his eyes, and his breastplate was about 6 sizes too big. I wondered if there was any way I'd look that ridiculous when I first arrived. Unfortunately, I probably had. Nico lifted his sword with effort. Do we get to kill the other team? Well, no. But the hunters are immortal, right? That's only if you don't fall in battle. Besides, it would be awesome if we just, resurrected as soon as we were killed, so we could keep fighting and... Nico, this is serious. Real swords. These can hurt. He stared at me a little disappointed, and I realised that I just sounded like my mother. Whoa, not a good sign. I patted Nico on the shoulder. Hey, it's cool, just follow the team. Stay out of Zoe's way. We'll have a blast. Chiron's hoof thundered on the pavilion floor. Heroes, he called. You know the rules. The river is the boundary line. Blue team, Camp Half-Blood, shall take the westwards. Hunters of Artemis, red team, shall take the eastwards. I will serve as referee and battlefield medic. No intentional maiming, please. All magic items are allowed. To your positions! Sweet, Nico whispered next to me. What kind of magic items? Do I get one? I was about to break it to him that he didn't, when Thalia said, Blue team, follow me. They cheered and followed, had to run to catch up, and tripped over somebody's shield, so I didn't look much like a co-captain, more like an idiot. We set our flag at the top of Zeus's fist. It's the cluster of boulders in the middle of the West Woods that, if you look at it just the right way, looks like a huge fist sticking out of the ground. If you look at it from any other side, it looks like a pile of enormous deer droppings, but Chiron wouldn't let us call the place the poop pile, especially after it had been named for Zeus, who doesn't have much of a sense of humour. Anyway, it was a good place to set the flag. The top boulder was 6 metres tall and really hard to climb, so the flag was clearly visible, like the rules said it had to be, and it didn't matter that the guards weren't allowed to stand within 10 metres of it. I set Nico on guard duty with Beckendorf and the Stoll brothers, figuring he'd be safely out of the way. We'll send out a decoy to the left, Thalia told the team. Selina, you lead that. Got it. Take Laurel and Jason. They're good runners. Make a wide arc around the hunters. Attract as many as you can. I'll take the main raiding party round to the right and catch them by surprise. Everybody nodded. It sounded good, and Thalia said it with such confidence you couldn't help but believe it would work. Thalia looked at me. Anything to add, Percy? Yeah. Keep sharp on defence. We've got 4 guards, 2 scouts. That's not much for a big forest. I'll be roving. Yell if you need help. And don't leave your post, Thalia said. Unless you see a golden opportunity, I added. Thalia scowled. Just don't leave your post. Right, unless... Percy! She touched my arm and shocked me. I mean, everybody can give static shocks in the winter, but when Thalia does, it hurts. I guess it's because her dad is the god of lightning. She's been known to fry off people's eyebrows. Sorry, Thalia said, though she didn't sound particularly sorry. Now, is everybody clear? Everybody nodded. We broke into our smaller groups. The horn sounded, and the game began. Selina's group disappeared into the woods on the left. Valia's group gave it a few seconds, and then darted off towards the right. I waited for something to happen. I climbed Zeus's fist, and had a good view over the forest. I remembered how the hunters had stormed out of the woods when they fought the manticore, and I was prepared for something like that. One huge charge that could overwhelm us. But nothing happened. I caught a glimpse of Selina and her new scouts. They ran through a clearing, followed by 5 of the hunters, leading them deep into the woods and away from Thalia. The plan seemed to be working, and then I spotted another clump of hunters heading to the right, bows ready. They must have spotted Thalia. "What's happening?" Nico demanded, trying to climb up next to me. My mind was racing. Thalia would never get through, but the hunters were divided. With that many on either flank, their centre had to be wide open, if I moved fast. I looked at Beckendorf. "Can you guys hold the fort?" Beckendorf snorted. "Of course. I'm going in." The Stoll brothers and Nico cheered as I raced towards the boundary line. I was running at top speed and I felt great. I leapt over the creek into enemy territory. I could see their silver flag up ahead, only one guard, who wasn't even looking in my direction. I heard fighting to my left and right, somewhere in the woods. I had it made. The guard turned at the last minute. It was Bianca D'Angelo. Her eyes widened as I slammed into her and she went sprawling in the snow. "Sorry!" I yelled. I ripped down the silver silk flag from the tree and took off. I was 10 metres away before Bianca managed to yell for help. I thought I was home free. Zip! A silvery cord raced across my ankles and fastened to the tree next to me. A tripwire, fired from a bow. Before I could even think about stopping, I went down hard, sprawling in the snow. "Percy!" Thalia yelled, off to my left. "What are you doing?" Before she reached me, an arrow exploded at her feet, and a cloud of yellow smoke billowed around her team. They started coughing and gagging. I could smell the gas from across the woods, the horrible smell of sulphur. "No fair!" Thalia gasped. "Fart arrows are unsportsmanlike." I got up and started running again. Only a few more metres to the river, and I had the game. More arrows whizzed past my ears. A hunter came out of nowhere and slashed at me with her knife, but I parried and kept running. I heard yelling from our side of the river. Beckendorf and Nico were running towards me. I thought they were coming to welcome me back, but then I saw they were chasing someone. Zoe Nightshade, racing towards me like a cheetah, dodging campers with no trouble, and she had our flag in her hands. "No!" I yelled, and poured on the speed. I was a metre from the water when Zoe bolted across to her own side, slamming into me for good measure. The hunters cheered as both sides converged on the creek. Chiron appeared out of the woods, looking grim. He had the Stoll brothers on his back, and it looked as if both of them had taken some nasty whacks to the head. Connor Stoll had 2 arrows sticking out of his helmet like antennae. "The hunters win!" Chiron announced without pleasure, and then he muttered, "For the 56th time in a row." "Perseus Jackson!" Thalia yelled, storming towards me. She smelled like rotten eggs, and she was so mad that blue sparks flickered on her armour. Everybody cringed and backed up because of Aegeus. It took all my willpower not to cower. "What in the name of the gods were you thinking?" she bellowed. I balled my fists. I'd had enough bad stuff happen to me for one day. I didn't need this. I got the flag, Thalia. I shook it in her face. I saw a chance and I took it. "I was at their base," Thalia yelled. "But the flag was gone. If you hadn't butted in, we would have won. You had too many on you. Oh, so it's my fault. I didn't say that." "Ah!" Thalia pushed me, and a shock went through my body that blew me backwards 3 metres into the water. Some of the campers gasped. A couple of hunters stifled laughs. "Sorry," Thalia said, turning pale. "I didn't mean to." Anger roared in my ears. A wave erupted from the river, blasting into Thalia's face and dousing her from head to toe. I stood up. "Yeah," I growled. "I didn't mean to either." Thalia was breathing heavily. "Enough!" Chiron ordered, but Thalia held out her spear. "You want some, seaweed brain?" Somehow it was okay when Annabeth called me that. At least I'd got used to it. But hearing it from Thalia was not cool. "Bring it on, pinecone face." I raised Riptide, but before I could even defend myself, Thalia yelled and a blast of lightning came down from the sky, hit her spear like a lightning rod and slammed into my chest. I sat down hard. There was a burning smell. I had a feeling it was my clothes. "Thalia," Chiron said, "that is enough." I got to my feet and willed the entire river to rise. It swirled up, hundreds of gallons of water in a massive icy funnel cloud. "Percy!" Chiron pleaded. I was about to hurl it at Thalia when I saw something in the woods. I lost my anger and my concentration all at once. The water splashed back into the riverbed. Thalia was so surprised, she turned to see what I was looking at. Something was approaching. It was shrouded in a murky green mist, but as it got closer, the campers and hunters gasped. "This is impossible," Chiron said. I'd never heard him sound so nervous. She has never left the attic. Never. And yet the withered mummy that held the oracle shuffled forward until she stood in the centre of the group. Mist curled around our feet, turning the snow a sickly shade of green. None of us dared move. Then her voice hissed inside my head. Apparently, everyone could hear it because several clutched their hands over their ears. "I am the spirit of Delphi," the voice said, "speaker of the prophecies of Phoebus Apollo, slayer of the mighty Python." The oracle regarded me with its cold, dead eyes, and then she turned unmistakably towards Zoe Nightshade. "Approach, seeker, and ask." Zoe swallowed. "What must I do to help my goddess?" The oracle's mouth opened, and green mist poured out. I saw the vague image of a mountain, and a girl standing at the barren peak. It was Artemis, but she was wrapped in chains, fettered to the rocks. She was kneeling, her hands raised as if to fend off an attacker, and it looked like she was in pain. The oracle spoke. 5 shall go west, to the goddess in chains. 1 shall be lost in the land without rain. The bane of Olympus shows the trail. Campers and hunters combined prevail. The Titan's curse must one withstand, and 1 shall perish by a parent's hand. Then, as we were watching, the mist swirled and retreated like a great green serpent in the mummy's mouth. The oracle sat down on a rock and became as still as she had been in the attic, as if she might sit by this creek for 100 years.